Jimmy who?
Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy who?
I don't know who he is.
Jimmy Carter's a basketball player, isn't he?
When Jimmy Carter announced his run for president, he was relatively unknown. His campaign focused on the idea that he wasn't another politician. He wasn't another Richard Nixon. After the Watergate scandal, the American people were frustrated with corruption that was rampant in the government. Carter would bring something new. He was a peanut farmer and a church pastor in Georgia. He was a genuinely good dude, which made him a poor politician. Carter would never compromise on his morals or play any political games, which gave him a hard time getting along with Congress. One of Carter's first acts as president was to pardon all Vietnam draft evaders. His presidency continued the civil rights movement, and his administration included more African Americans and women than any before. One of Carter's most controversial decisions was to give up the Panama Canal. South American countries felt that the U.S. holding that land was too imperialistic. It's important for the U.S. to keep South America happy in order to maintain its sphere of influence, so Carter returned the canal to Panama to restore relations with South American countries. Besides, the military advantage of controlling the canal was obsolete in the age of nuclear missiles, and the Soviets were considering digging their own canal anyway. The costs outweighed the benefits. Ever since its creation after World War II, the legitimacy of Israel was a hot topic. The Camp David Accords were meant to create a framework for peace in the Middle East. President Carter invited Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin to his mountain retreat called Camp David to come up with some resolution between the two countries. Tensions stayed high, but they eventually signed an accord. The Camp David Accords established Israel's right to exist, recognition for Palestinian rights, and the ability for Palestinians to self-govern in the territories of Gaza and the West Bank. Israel provided Western influence in the Middle East that gave the U.S. a strategic foothold to ward off and contain Soviet influence.
The 3 Mile Island disaster was a partial nuclear reactor meltdown in Pennsylvania, caused by a broken valve which allowed the reactor coolant to escape. The incident was caused by plant operators failing to recognize the problem as well as design flaws in the facility. The 3 Mile Island disaster led to regulations and innovations aimed at reducing the risk of future meltdowns, as well as an increase in public hesitancy towards nuclear energy.
In 1969, the US and the Soviets acknowledged the dangers of nuclear weapons and began the Strategic Arms Limitations Talks, or SALT. The second round of negotiations, also known as SALT II, happened in 1971 during Carter's administration. Both nations attempted to limit the number of nuclear weapons each country should be allowed to have. Each nation agreed to maintain no more than 2,250 of each type of nuclear missile. The talks were unsuccessful as neither country honored the agreement. The final SALT treaty was never ratified by Congress due to rising tensions with the Soviets. What's that? It's time for the mystery document. The rules here are simple. I try to guess the mystery document, or else I get shocked. It is a crisis of confidence. It is a crisis that strikes at the very heart and soul and spirit of our national will. We can see this crisis in the growing doubt about our meaning of our lives and in the loss of the unity of purpose for our nation. The erosion of our confidence in the future is threatening to destroy the social and political fabric of America. The confidence that we have always had as a people is not simply some romantic dream or a proverb in a dusty book that we read just on the 4th of July. It is an idea which has founded our nation and has guided our development as a people. Confidence in the future has supported everything else: public institutions and the private enterprise and our own families, and the very Constitution of the United States. Confidence has defined our course and has served as a link between generations. We've always believed in something called progress. We've always had the faith that the days of our children would be better than our own. Well, the video is about Jimmy Carter, and I'm also the one that chose the mystery document. So I'm going to safely say it's the Jimmy Carter malaise speech. Yes! Crash Course copied me.
Carter didn't call it the Malaysia speech. It was given to it by critics who said it was one of the most politically tone-deaf speeches in modern American history. Carter said that the country's economic struggles were caused by lack of confidence, and instead of coming across as a pep talk like Carter expected, the American people felt like he was shifting the blame on them.
In April 1978, the Afghan government was overthrown by a military coup led by communist Nur Muhammad Taraki. The new Afghan government forged close ties with the Soviets. Taraki ruled with an iron fist and ruthlessly extinguished all opposition to him. The rebel group called the Mujahideen, who were anti-communist and devout Muslims, along with infighting within the government, caused the Afghanistan government to begin to fall apart. The Soviets saw this as an opportunity to invade and establish a puppet government under Babrak Karmal. The U.S. publicly denounced the Soviet invasion and imposed sanctions similar to the ones currently being imposed on Russia for invading Ukraine. The U.S. didn't want to send their own troops because, World War III. So instead, the CIA trained and sent supplies to the Mujahideen rebels who had harassed the Soviets. One of those Mujahideen trainees was Osama bin Laden, and others joined the Taliban, a terrorist group who controls Afghanistan today. The supplies and weaponry sent by the U.S. was shipped to the rebels via Pakistan, where lots of the supplies would be fraudulently sold off along the way. The U.S. response to the invasion was riddled with fraud and stuffed the pockets of many corrupt individuals. In response to the invasion of Afghanistan, the president proclaimed the Carter Doctrine, which said that the U.S. would use military force if necessary to protect its interests in the Persian Gulf.
The public's faith in Carter crashed at the end of his term when he was faced with the Iran hostage crisis. A large group of Iranian college students stormed the U.S. embassy and took 52 Americans hostage. Carter decided not to bomb Iran to the ground and instead choose the diplomacy route. 444 days later, and on the last day of Carter's presidency, the hostages were freed. The storming of the embassy was fueled by anger at the U.S. After the Eisenhower administration supported a coup against the Iranian Prime Minister Mossadegh and replaced him with the anti-communist Shahu, and who would happily sell Iranian oil to the U.S. He widely was unpopular, so the Iranians revolted in what was known as the Iranian Revolution. The Shah fled Iran, and the Iranian people put Ayatollah Ruhollah in charge. Ayatollah became an Islamic rule, which, in addition to Mujahideen Jihad in Afghanistan, showed a shift in Middle Eastern policies away from nationalism and socialism to Islam, like it is today. During the crisis, the American people felt a sense of unity and patriotism, while at the same time there was a rise in anti Iranian hate crime.
All this instability in the Middle East caused the energy crisis in 1979. Iran has some of the biggest oil supplies in the world, and the Iranian Revolution cut the U.S. off from that sweet supply of black gold. Oil prices went soaring, and since almost everything uses oil in either its production or transportation, the price of everything else rose too, causing inflation to rise to 10% a year. Qatar responded to the oil crisis by restricting the amount of gas you can buy and by telling people to turn off their lights and wear a sweater to decrease consumption. And Carter loves his sweaters. The country was in a recession, and while it wasn't his fault, Carter didn't do much about it, and it really hurt his approval. President Carter declared a state of emergency after the neighborhood of Love Canal in Niagara Falls, New York, was discovered to be built on top of hazardous toxic waste. Soon, other towns found that they were in a similar situation. The state offered to buy the two rows of houses that were hardest hit, but considering the risk of cancers and birth defects that the chemicals posed to the people demanded more. The Love Canal Neighborhood Association got what they wanted by getting the media involved, which put Americans all over the country on their side. Finally, the federal government agreed to buy all the homes and relocate everyone in Love Canal.